In 1981, in Savannah, Georgia, a feather floats down and lands at Forrest Gump's feet. This feather is special. It represents his amazing life journey. Forrest is sitting on a bench next to a stranger and starts telling his life story. He begins with his mother's famous saying, "Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get." He then talks about shoes, saying they can tell you a lot about where someone has been and where they're going. Forrest's story takes us back to 1956. He was born with a curved spine and had to wear leg braces, but that didn't stop him from living life. He grew up in Greenbow, Alabama with his mom, who named him after a Civil War general. Even though Forrest had a low IQ of 75, which made school hard, his mom's support helped him go to a local school. To make money, she rented out rooms in their house. One of the tenants was a young Elvis Presley, who played his guitar while Forrest danced to his music. Later, they saw Elvis on TV doing the same dance moves, which was a surprise. On his first day of school, Forrest met Jenny Curran, a girl he thought was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Even though other kids teased him, Jenny became his best friend. They spent a lot of time together, going on little adventures. Jenny had a tough home life and sometimes stayed with Forrest at night to feel safe. One day, when bullies chased Forrest on bikes, Jenny told him to run. As he ran, his leg braces broke, showing he was a natural runner. Forrest was worried when Jenny didn't come to school, so he went to her house and found out she was living with an abusive father. The authorities took Jenny away to live with her grandmother, who lived closer to Forrest. Forrest was happy because this meant he could see Jenny more often. When Jenny felt scared at night, she would come to Forrest's house for comfort. As Forrest grew up, his running skills got noticed, especially when he ran across a football field during a game without realizing it. Coach Bear Bryant saw him and asked, "Who in the world is that?" Forrest's running earned him a football scholarship to the University of Alabama, where he became a star player known for his speed. But football wasn't the only thing going on at college. Forrest witnessed a big event when Governor George Wallace tried to stop 2 African-American students from enrolling at the university. Even though Governor Wallace tried to block the students, President John F. Kennedy stepped in to make sure they could register. Forrest was there when one of the students, Vivian Malone Jones, dropped her books, quickly picked them up, and handed them back, which was a special moment for him. Forrest's feelings for Jenny keep growing, but he faces a tough situation when he sees her with a boy in a car during a rainstorm. He hears Jenny feeling uncomfortable and rushes over to punch the boy, which makes Jenny upset. Even though she's angry, Forrest tries to make it up to her by offering chocolates. When Jenny asks Forrest what he wants to be in the future, he simply says he just wants to be himself. Jenny shares her dream of becoming a famous singer, like Joan Baez. They share a sweet, awkward moment together. As Forrest finishes college, he's so focused on football that he doesn't notice it's time to move on. His amazing performance on the field gets him on the All-American team and a chance to meet President Kennedy. But things go awry when, after drinking 15 Dr. Peppers, Forrest really needs to use the restroom during his meeting with the president. By 1966, Forrest has graduated and decides to join the U.S. Army. On his first day, he meets a fellow soldier named Benjamin Buford Blue, or Bubba. Bubba talks excitedly about shrimp, saying he knows all about the shrimp business from working on his uncle's shrimp boat. In the Army, Forrest quickly learns to keep his bed spotless and respond to the drill sergeant with a sharp, "Yes, sir." He even sets a record for assembling a gun and gets praised by his sergeant. Meanwhile, Bubba keeps talking about shrimp, even while polishing his boots and cleaning the floors. At night, Forrest misses his mom and Jenny. Bubba tries to cheer him up by giving him a Playboy magazine, and Forrest learns that Jenny was expelled from college. He eventually finds Jenny working at a strip club, singing and playing guitar while naked. Shocked, Forrest confronts her, but Jenny is mad at him for interfering. During their tense chat, Forrest tells her he's being sent to Vietnam. Jenny, worried for his safety, tells him to run whenever he's in danger. Forrest, staying true to his simple nature, says, "Okay," before parting ways with Jenny. Before heading to Vietnam, Forrest visits his mom, who is worried and asks him to come back home safely. In 1967, Forrest and Bubba are sent to Vietnam with the 9th Infantry Division, where they meet their commanding officer, Lieutenant Dan Taylor. They start their patrols in the tough jungle, and Forrest writes letters to Jenny, but he never hears back. Their missions are suddenly interrupted when their platoon is attacked. Many of their friends are killed. Lieutenant Dan tells everyone to retreat, and Bubba tells Forrest to run. Forrest, being himself, starts running through the chaos, dodging bullets and explosions. When he realizes he left Bubba behind, he turns back to save him. On the way, he finds another injured soldier, Tex, and carries him to safety. Forrest goes back to save more soldiers and eventually finds Lieutenant Dan, who is hurt but refuses help. Forrest insists on carrying him out of danger. Finally, Forrest finds Bubba, who is badly injured. Carries Bubba to safety, but Bubba sadly doesn't make it and tells Forrest his last wish was to go home before he dies in Forrest's arms. In the middle of all this, Forrest barely notices that he has been shot in the buttock. Forrest is sent to a military hospital to recover, where he ends up in a bed next to Lieutenant Dan, who has lost his legs in the fight. Lieutenant Dan is very upset about his injuries and struggles with his situation. While in the hospital, Forrest is surprised to get several letters from Jenny that have finally arrived. During his recovery, Forrest discovers ping pong and becomes really good at it, practicing all the time even when no one else is around. One night, Lieutenant Dan tells Forrest he's angry about being saved. He's upset that he survived but lost his legs and wishes he had died in battle like his ancestors. Despite Dan's harsh words, Forrest stays calm and doesn't let it bother him. As Forrest recovers, he learns he will get the Medal of Honor for his bravery. When he goes to tell Lieutenant Dan the news, he finds out Dan has already gone home. At the Medal of Honor ceremony, Forrest's mom watches proudly as he receives the award, beaming with happiness at his achievements. President Lyndon B. Johnson gives Forrest the Medal of Honor. In a funny moment, he asks Forrest to show where he was injured. Forrest pulls down his pants to reveal the bullet wound on his buttocks, surprising the president. After the ceremony, Forrest wanders around the Capitol and accidentally stumbles into an anti-war protest at the Pentagon. Not understanding what's happening, he joins the crowd heading to the stage. There he meets Abby Hoffman, famous activist, who asks him to talk about his war experiences. But as Forrest starts speaking, someone turns off the microphone, so the crowd can't hear him. Just then, Jenny calls out to him from the crowd. Happy to see her, Forrest rushes off the stage to reunite with her. Jenny introduces Forrest to the Black Panther Party, but their reunion turns sour when Jenny's abusive boyfriend hits her. Forrest, being protective, fights back. This incident ends their time with the group, and they spend the rest of the night walking and talking about their lives. Jenny talks about her struggles with drugs and her new life as a hippie. They chat until sunrise, but in the morning, Jenny leaves with her group saying a heartfelt goodbye to Forrest. Forrest's ping pong skills lead to new opportunities. He competes against players from China in what's called ping pong diplomacy, which makes him famous. His fame gets him on the Dick Cavett Show with John Lennon, where they talk about peace and Forrest's adventures. By New Year's Eve, Forrest meets Lieutenant Dan, who is in a bad place, drinking heavily and angry at the government and his disability. After a party, they go back to their room with two women. When the women start flirting, Forrest refuses because he still loves Jenny. The women get angry and insult Forrest, so Lieutenant Dan kicks them out. Forrest's success in ping pong leads to a meeting with President Nixon, who gives him a room at the Watergate complex. Forrest's innocent actions end up exposing the Watergate scandal, which becomes a big historical event. In 1974, Forrest is honorably discharged from the Army and returns to Greenbow, Alabama. With the money he made from endorsing a ping pong paddle, Forrest buys a shrimping boat in Bayou La Batre, just like he promised Bubba. Lieutenant Dan, who had promised to be Forrest's first mate, joins him in the shrimping business. At first, things are tough. Everything changes when their boat survives Hurricane Carmen. With no other boats around, they start catching tons of shrimp, and the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company becomes a huge success. For the first time, Lieutenant Dan thanks Forrest for saving his life. They make a lot of money, and Dan wisely invests it in early tech companies, like Apple. Forrest doesn't quite get it, and thinks they invested in a fruit company. But their investments make them rich. True to his word, Forrest donates half of his earnings to Bubba's family, making sure they benefit from the success Bubba dreamed of. Afterward, Forrest goes back home to care for his mom, who is sick with cancer. He stays with her until she passes away, showing his deep love. After his mother's death, Forrest volunteers as a gardener at the University of Alabama. It's a quiet life that gives him purpose. In 1976, 10 years after he last saw Jenny, she returns. They visit her old, abandoned house, and Jenny gets upset, throwing rocks at it. Forrest, hopeful as always, proposes to her, but she says no, leaving him heartbroken. They spend one night together before Jenny leaves the next morning. To cope with his heartbreak, Forrest starts running with no particular goal. His running captures people's attention, and they start following him, inspired by his perseverance. Forrest runs across the country through all kinds of landscapes and keeps going despite the challenges. After 3 years and 2.5 months, he suddenly stops and returns to Greenbow. Later, Forrest gets a letter from Jenny asking him to visit. At the bus stop, he tells a woman next to him his story. The woman tells him Jenny's address is just a few blocks away. Forrest rushes to see her. When he arrives, Jenny introduces him to her young son, Forrest Gump Jr., who looks a lot like him. Jenny reveals that Forrest is the boy's father. Shocked but happy, Forrest embraces being a dad and bonds with his son. However, Jenny is very ill and tells Forrest she has a virus that doctors can't cure. They move back to Greenbow, and Forrest and Jenny have a small wedding surrounded by friends and family, including Lieutenant Dan, who is now engaged to a woman named Susan and uses titanium alloy prosthetics. A year later, Jenny dies, leaving Forrest heartbroken again. But he finds comfort in being a devoted father to Forrest Jr. They share many fun times, playing ping pong, fishing, and exploring. Move on from the painful memories. Forrest buys the land where Jenny's father lived and has the old house torn down. It's a fresh start for him and his son. When Forrest Jr. starts school, Forrest is there to see him off, just like his mother did for him years ago. As the bus drives away, Forrest thinks about his journey and feels grateful for everything that has happened. With the white feather drifting away, he knows that, in the end, everything turned out just right. If you like this video, please leave a like and do subscribe to my channel. I will see you in our next video.